Hi everyone, welcome to week 9. Terrific to have Stephanie and Scott with us today, and they're going to talk to us magically about their own final projects. And I will hand over straight to them because I just think it's a really useful conversation to keep having.
We didn't organise who would go first.
You go, Steph.
Who needs to go? Steph, you go first.
Yeah. So,
Hope, can you share screen on this? Sorry, everyone, we've just jumped onto this on a Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I think so.
Brilliant.
You guys can see this, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
I can.
So maybe I'll go full screen mode if I can. Maybe I can't because we're watching. This is okay, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Yeah,
So this is my process log from my graduation studio, and I'll just kind of talk through not the actual design itself because that's irrelevant, but more so just the logic and flow of the layout of this book and how it kind of curates someone foreign to this project from the beginning of my design thinking all the way to final design drawings. So, my project was called The Encounter. I kind of chose this photo that I took back when I was in New York, however long ago. And throughout the course of this entire process log, I used a specific color to highlight the sound that my project was looking at. And that just kind of followed through the whole process log. And then, it was just kind of using different hierarchy of text. So just to catch people's eyes in, particular part 1 of this is in a different color, and then, highlighting this in a bolder text. Oops. And then using a slightly lower, a slightly less bolded text to just to differentiate different text styles. And then again, so this is something that we don't want to see in your presentations, but because this was a process log of the entire year of work, it had a lot of text at the beginning just to ground and introduce the topic.
Which is a great point. So a lot of the text you put into your process log and
yes.
You kept out presentation. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, perfect. Yeah. So definitely use a lot of text because you need to somehow describe this, whole year's worth of research. So definitely put that into your process log. I will preface, because I know we have had a lot of conversations about icons. I do have a fair few icons. And looking back at it, there was definitely, I could have probably workshopped that, but, that was however many years ago. And then, so, we get to part 2, which is project scope and objectives. And immediately I started to think about how to contextualize the site. So, layering of different pieces of information. So you kind of have the whole zoom out of Sydney in its context, showing, in this case, because our site was in Western Sydney Parklands, I was looking at it through the lens of the Parkland city and highlighting it in a different color, like red, for instance, just to really key out where our site was. And again, like I've been saying to other students, using black and white images is really effective. And then if you do have some kind of color scheme or whatever that's running through the whole of your presentation, if you use that to highlight things that are important for someone else who's never seen your project before, or parts of the site that are important to you, it's quite effective. And then I started to hear, we start to go into that more regional context, so zooming in a bit closer into the site, trying to bring as much information as you can into a few graphics is quite meaningful. So there's a lot of information here. And because this was printed out as a book, it was quite legible. I think on people's laptops, it would be really almost impossible to read these legends and stuff. But this is something that you could just have as one entire page. And then you could have your site analysis again as one entire page. And again, using key colors to just highlight some parts that are really site specific, which is quite important, especially in the studio that we've been doing with you guys. And then here was this was from our T2 master plan that we did with our group. And so in this case, we had a bit more specific looking at looking at our studio through the lens of objectives and principles and whatnot. So these were our group's principles and objectives, and then just highlighting what part of the site that I've chosen. So, you know, that's something that you guys can also do if you were to zoom out and show some past work from your T2 studio as well, and then showing why that site is important to you and why you've decided to, you know, to go through a whole investigation throughout the course of this term.
Steph, I would expect everyone is probably showing just a little bit of T2 and T1. I suspect you've got moments in your sequence of your narrative where it will be totally appropriate to insert them in. Just keep going. But I'd imagine everyone probably has a little bit.
I think we definitely have to zoom out, and just so we understand why you've actually chosen that site and why it's important to you is super interesting for someone who has never project before, is familiar with the base precinct. And then again, you know, I was choosing my site selection, and one thing, always check that you've extended your text boxes, as this thing haunts me, and it was the only big mistake that I had done when I exported. Especially that it was a printed document, so always check. And then I started to go.
Steph, can I put something in on that too? Everyone should just, if you've got the time, do try. I mean, it's tricky, but do try and get a spell check happening through your work. I know it's tricky, and particularly with English as a second language for so many. Do your best, but look particularly for the headings. I'd say particularly for the headings. Even don't get the spell check done on some of the smaller text, but try and get it for all the headings.
But you can, even in InDesign, it has the fly through option of spell check at the bottom, and you can just click tick 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 to change it all automatically at the very end of an export. So I do suggest to do that a few times over before you do the final export, so you're not overwhelmed with 1,000 spelling mistakes. And then in this case, I started to go through theoretical framework. So, having that heading slightly in a lower grayscale. And then in this, because I'm speaking to a specific concept, I've made that the more prominent text type. And it happens again. So, graying out the sub and then making that more important. And then now I've started to go into responding to the site. And so this is now where I started to produce all of my own graphics. So a lot of that other stuff was things that I've been doing in T1 and T2. Well, I mean, I guess in my case, we only had 2 terms, so term 1. And then making the graphics to kind of show what my topic was, which is something that I really wanted to do. So I was using a lot of dots to kind of show the movement of sound from the CBD and its potential encroaching into Western Sydney parklands. And again, it's, graying out this, making this the core color. And then in this case, I was looking at context. So it's kind of just trying to find that sweet spot between how to signal what exactly each drawing is talking about. And then again, I liked pastels at this point in my life, and everything was kind of cute. And it's kind of site specific, but again, we've been stressing in this studio to really show the site as much as you can in every single image. Our site was a completely empty blank space, so there wasn't too much to show to contextualize where it was, but you guys have the opportunity to show so many landmarks, and just, within one image, someone can so easily see where they are. So that's really important. In this case, we were looking at opportunities and constraints, but you can definitely promote drawings like this through looking at fundamental assets. We've been talking about in that specific language that we've been using throughout this whole semester. And then, into the next step, looking at processes occurring on site. So that's really now you keying out those site-specific drivers that are essential to the area that you're looking at, and also the whole systems occurring on site. And in this case, it was just simple little drawings and showing in black to highlight what was most important in particular zones in this wetland, and bolding out text to really highlight, because no one's going to really read that small text, but if they see settling and they see microbial communities digesting, it makes it more important, and someone will be able to read that quite quickly.
Great, Steph, great to see that actually. Just that pop on the page, and all the time thinking hierarchy on the page. What do you want the page to be saying? And you do quickly get a grab of absorbing and transpires and absorbing.
Yeah, and it's pretty bold, and it looks like, maybe when you're laying it out it looks too much, but it's so worth it. And then and then only now I actually come to my question and my design intent. So all of that stuff at the beginning in the forefront was my thinking and understanding the site and really unpacking it. And then finally now I go, okay, so what's the question? I would have loved to have workshopped the question. It was super long and kind of crazy.
But could have workshopped that.
I know. Would have loved Patrick in this case.
Steph, I just want to this is your process log, right? Just repeating, yeah.
Yes, process log, yep. Process log. So don't again, when you see 91 pages, this would be impossible to present in 15 minutes. And then now I started to go into process, and this is where a lot of your little fun models can come into play. I have shown this I think, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago anyway, but it's 2 images on a huge white sheet, but it's effective because your eyes are drawn to it immediately. There's nothing else for it to look at. This was presented because it was a book, so it was landscape. So when you opened it up, these pages corresponded with each other. But even though I'm presenting it just as a PDF, it still reads quite well. And again, I'm going back to that whole dots, which I was using throughout the whole my whole journey of this project, and then using colors to highlight particular important parts of this model that I was doing. We have looked through this before, so we can kind of skip. And then it's kind of that similar idea of using these key colors to highlight particular important parts on the pages. I would have been good to have probably bolded in a similar way that I had done in the previous pages particular words that were important here, because just looking at this, my eyes are only immediately drawn to sound as a design driver and stages of sonic perception, but I don't really get what is important in each of these categories. Again, like lots of cute little icons, and again, it's so much text. I could have definitely have summarized some of this, but this was a process log, so I guess a lot of it was quite important to me, but using colors across that are quite uniform to highlight what I'm keying out in each image. And then this is, I guess, that idea of the precedent study that we were starting to unpack last week. I was looking at my precedents through a particular lens, which was intrigue, space, people, environment. So if there's something particular that might be important in the thing that you're looking at, and you might be able to categorize that through a precedent study, it makes it a bit more meaningful than just chucking some images on a page and someone's supposed to actually understand what that and how that's important to your project. So I was, kind of starting to draw over particular precedent studies using, again, that color and trying to really, because sound is such a difficult concept to show. So I just had to really use a lot of drawings over the top of images. I had 2 pages for precedents, and I just kind of took away the most important parts to me. Again, a lot of text, could have summarized it a bit better. And then, I had quite a lot of pages in this design process, and in this case, it was sound mapping. Again, it was kind of icon heavy, and I just think it was quite effective in that it was minimal colors and just using, again, that key color to highlight what was important. In this case, it was that washing of sound above the landscape prior to design. And this, again, using the colors, showing that below and above surface, which is what we've been really focusing on and pushing with you guys. And, you guys probably have so many what you would call crappy sketches. I think they're really meaningful because it shows the process of how you got to final realized drawings. maybe it might not be something that you'll show in your finished presentation, but it means that you can use all that those rich drawings in your process log.
For sure. Nice point. Nice to see them underneath other things, you know, they even just for the implication of your sketch and your development of things. It's nice that you've just popped in there underneath some relevant.
And it's really quick because all you have to do is just, you know, scan, remove the background, turn the opacity to 50, and then you can overlay whatever more finalized drawings that you have over the top. And it looks a bit more richer than showing, you know, graphic computer generated drawings. And again, you know, turning down the opacity in these drawings and using a dark color to, in this case, you know, show different modes of circulation that could be explored across the site. And in most of my layouts, I kind of kept to almost a center for all of my drawings, and then used, particularly if I was using a grid, and just lining that up almost immediately before I started inputting a lot of my drawings into InDesign. And, you know, just having because a lot of the times when we are starting to see plans, it's really difficult to spatialize what that actually looks like. But then if you just incorporate it with some simple illustrations or sections or vignettes on the side, it immediately speaks to what these strange forms actually represent. So if you're able to have a good hierarchy of section with plan, like we were talking about by starting to figure out your sequence on a page, it just helps bring more character to a lot of your design moves. Again, it's kind of that similar sequence that follows across when I have 4 or 5 plans. And then I started to, in this case, you know, move to Sounders evolution, using a lot of graphics. And again, that, you know, overlaying this transparent, crappy sketch that I had done with some photos. Pretty much all the photos that I have in here are things that I've taken or friends have. And making sure that, you know, you credit, particularly if they aren't your images, and just going through the regular Harvard kind of standard of bibliography. And then in this case, again, using that key color, using simple lines, and just constantly checking that everything has a flow in graphic representation. You know, this was simple, but it was looking at an assemblage, and I wanted to understand different layers of sound. So I was just extracting particular photos that I liked or particular quotes from songs and laying them out on a page. And again, that transparency over the top of photos. And a lot of the time I just kind of turned the vibrancy down in a lot of my images and tried to key out what was more important in that image itself. And again, yeah, that kind of lower transparency, big image, like you can really play around with cool photo layouts, particularly because you are working just on in a digital presentation. I really liked Gursky as a photographer, still do. You know, maybe there are things that aren't particular to this site, but they are things that drove a lot of your design thinking. So it could be artists, or it could be photographers, or it could be something else, or it could be musicians. But it adds more meaning, I think, to kind of showcase who you are as a person. Kind of going back to what Ben was saying, how, you know, in many cases when you're showing this work, and especially that you're having this up online on a website, you have potential people who might want to hire you, and it shows who you are and what you bring to the table almost. And then, you know, here I just started to really just scan in all my really, really bad drawings and just using colors of the same kind of salmon hue or whatever across. And, you know, just really allowing for a lot of that, a lot of these drawings to take up the entire page and to really make them speak for themselves. And then it started to go into more finalized, or not finalized, this was our interim, and showing where I was at that point. And, you know, this was the final first render, and then going into more analysis over the top. starting to look at different ways of graphically representing work. So like that example that we were looking at on, I think it was Thursday or Tuesday, which was the exploded axo. I find them sometimes quite hard to read. Even in this case, it's kind of like, oh, I don't really know what much of this means. If you find that you're in a trap of, you can't get the angle right, plans and sections speak for themselves. So don't try to waste your time, mucking around with getting an axo perfect if you know that you can really quickly get a plan or a section to say exactly what this almost isn't saying. And then I started to throw in preliminary design stuff. So this was all the things that I had done in my interim, from crappy, not to scale section to still, all hand drawn, but relatively to scale, and having that hierarchy with, again, a lot of text, but some of this could have definitely been bolded out to really highlight what is being spoken to in this section. Having, annotations would have been useful, and classic not thinking below the section line, definitely should have done that. And this kind of hierarchy follows through across the next few pages. Again, speaking about that narrative, what kind of narrative are you trying to instill on the site and throughout the site? I was looking at different modes of getting people into the site and what kind of markers would start to activate particular areas, like using that color, using, these drawings as kind of different scales to show what's most important. And I was looking at a harvest strategy. So again, there are so many, you guys have so many rich drawings that you've been generating across the whole year essentially. And it's just kind of starting to workshop them into more meaningful drawings. In this case, I definitely could have put in so much more detail thinking below that line. But in this case, I was looking at a sequence of if areas were harvested, what areas would be exposed. And that's really easy. It was basically generating just one of these. I'm sorry if it's loud, my neighbor has a motorbike. But, generating one of these and then just changing, doing a copy and paste and then deleting out a particular area. And then just one simple line work immediately tells you so much. And then, bolding out what this drawing is speaking to, which was fragmented sunflower harvest. Whereas I could have, again, done a bold of what that actually was doing in the sense of syncopating experience through the site. I started to look at, like this page again, it's that overlay. It's kind of always having that similar finalized drawing and then what was the initial thinking that brought me to this final graphic. Similar again, we were more heavily focused on the master plan. And, as we've been speaking to you guys throughout this whole studio, we're looking at more phasing plans. So don't think too much into these more final renders when I didn't show a lot of phases that took me to the final stage. And these were, those quick sections that I had just done on trace and then translating that into a more final section. I started to think a little bit below the section line in terms of what sound was being generated from particular vegetation groups. And I was just using, again, that same color in section throughout the course of my final drawing. So rather than using, I guess, a typical black cut line, I was using this salmon color to just really reinforce it in this graphic kind of graphic production that I was doing. And again, it's that overlay, similar here. And then it, finally coming to this final master plan. And I know a lot of you guys have quite large sites and, we've been speaking to whether or not you can go into more detailed design and just key out particular areas and then show those in more detail. So that's where you can, have these little dash circles, dash boxes, whatever, to illustrate where those are. And, legends are really important just to show what's some of this annotation and, where your section lines are cutting through and what, maybe you have a hero shot or a montage view. And I always think it's quite important to show where that view is being generated from, because a lot of the time you'll have all these great perspectives, but we don't actually know where they're looking to, or like where they are actually, if you were to drop someone in this corner of the site, what would they be seeing? And just, the simple little graphic icon of that, extended out arrows really helps reiterate that. I started to I think this was a bit more legible from the first try, and it was, bringing out my specific theme in its particular color that I kept on coming, showing across this whole presentation. And then here again, it was that it would have been nice to have kept the same graphic style as this for these ones as well. So there was just a bit more, what's the word, likeness across both of them. And then these were the sections, but I think it would have been, especially if this was a digital presentation, to have had some of these sections within the sequence. So, it's quite difficult to know where these are situated without having to jump back to the plan. So like we've been saying, can you have a great sequence with section, plan, and potential image of the site or something like that? Because it is quite disorienting seeing something like this. In my case, I only really showed below the section line in my final drawings where my theme or where the sound was really important. That's also something that you can do where you might use a particular graphic style to really illustrate where your theme is most prominent. And then I was...
It's a super nice idea. It might be really efficient for people to sort of...
Yeah, I think so. Because then you might... It saves a lot of time in the rendering process. I was looking at really trying to bring many different forms of graphics into one meaningful drawing. So I wanted a flow in my boards because we printed off boards in the end. So I did montage to section to diagram, and it worked quite well because then it was just all together in one drawing and it showed a lot of information. And, in my boards, I had some annotations that were coming down to really key out what was important and what systems and processes were happening within. And, it was basically just ripping because I did these as separate drawings. So this was a bad SketchUp model. And then I just exported that, did a Photoshop montage with it, and then just combined the section that I had already generated with the montage. And if you're starting to, I hope that we all are now starting to think of all the drawings that we'll need between now and the final presentation. If you align them with something like this, where you start to bring together almost 3 drawing styles into one, it saves you a lot of time because you have one page that has almost everything about a particular zoom in your site. And I kind of gave my particular area's name. So this was the store, not very interesting. But again,
Steph, it looks like that's a great page. And like I can, in a presentation mode, you've got quite a lot to talk about without having to shift sheets, which also gives the panel a little bit longer than the sort of 7 or 12 seconds. Like if you're going to be spending 30 seconds on some of these and actually be able to talk into them, and in this section or on this pull out there, this is what I was trying to show. I think that really gets across what you're trying to get across.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, I could have definitely put in some kind of dynamic edged plan or something. So I liked everything to not have frames around them. But, if in the corner I showed a plan to show where this was, then I've kind of got everything in one drawing. And I just kind of followed this sequence across all of my particular zoom in areas. And, again, it's the model that I had kind of done, then the Photoshop, and then how it would have looked in a section. And if I had a plan, then it's that perfect combo. My design was pretty out there. And again, that happens again. I only flocked in areas where the flock of birds could be most appropriate. So,
there they are.
but they're not showing too much.
No, and they've landed in the trees.
They have, yeah.
All 64 of them.
Again, again, that sequence happening here. My planting and materials was really undercooked towards the end, so please take time and effort into that, because that's really important, particularly for a super site specific project that we are doing. And my model photos were pretty bad.
Steph, can I just click? Can you just go back that one screen?
Yeah.
On the course outline, I think it's about now. I was hoping we would have some sort of focus on getting a planting scheme going, if that was going to be relevant. And I think for many of you, it will be relevant, but almost not for all of you. But so let's prompt that discussion a little bit more this week too. Just thinking that through.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, because this is pretty crap, to be honest. Like my paths, I only kind of gave one material. I had apparently only 2 tree species. And then my vegetation was that particular phytoimmediate vegetation, which was just grasses and the sunflowers. But I really could have workshopped that because it's so important. But I don't know, I didn't get there. My model was it was okay. It wasn't the way I wanted it to turn out. I did a sectional model, and I've been talking to my students about this. I think sectional models are really neat, particularly for if you are looking at detailed parts of your site. And so, you know, I had to do the whole laser cut thing because we had it all presented in front of our boards. But in your case, you don't have to fork out as much money as we did when we were in studio. So you can use so much more, you know, scrappier material, but in the after, you know, the Photoshops or whatever you are using to really exaggerate the models that you've made on the computer, you can make some really meaningful section cuts and just use particular materials to show those layers that are happening beneath and above in that section. And it just means for a more meaningful model than the zoomed out, you know, 1 to 5,000 plan that, to be honest, doesn't really say that much. Sometimes they can, but mainly just topography. Our site's flat.
Yeah,
so really
section models are that's a great prompt, Steph. Really great.
It makes it just far more engaging. In my case,
and how you could show what's underground too.
Yeah, absolutely. I also in mine, I made a soundscape with my project, so I ordered off online these funny little recording things, so you could press them while you were reading the boards and watching, you know, looking at the model. You could press particular soundscapes that I had kind of constructed. Which is something that you guys can do. Like you can play sound over the top of your presentations, or you can show video recordings for, you know, 10 seconds if they're important to your theme, or if they're particular, you know, ephemeral qualities on the site that you find really interesting. You could really show that, or maybe you have this kind of moody sound happening underneath your entire presentation. You can really push it. In this case, I was looking at future soundscapes. So I've been talking to a lot of my students about zooming out and what's the relevance of your project in the greater context. I was just using kind of different gridded graphics of the same thing in each area. It was kind of a collage in the end, but it was just, you know, different forms of infrastructure and that kind of multiplying and what that has as a strain on soundscapes. And I kind of finished off with the design value. So, you know, just using, it's kind of exaggerated what my project could have had as a design value, but it was tying together, in this case, the principles that I had. I didn't use text, maybe it wasn't really that essential, and then showing what importance that had on a person if they were to, you know, navigate through the site. That was that. And then I had this was my main montage that I spent a lot of time on. So this was something that I had on my final board. So, you know, where you choose to put these montages and these big perspectives that look out into your site are really important. In my case, I wanted it to close on, you know, encompassing every single zoom in area. So being able to show that this was one of my zoom in sites, showing that this was one of my zoom in sites, and showing that this again was a zoom in area, and showing that as this kind of flyover. On my boards, I had the plan and it showed where the view out was coming from, but you know, you don't really need to put too much detail into buildings. I just put some random textures on it, and then kept everything around it white, so you have that dynamic edge, and you also have your eyes basically just jumping straight into the graphic rather than any of the context around it. And that was that. So yes.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, that was
Thank you,
awesome.
Steph.
Cool.
Steph, I don't know if you can remember about in number how many slides you think you would have shown in the presentation. Oh, sorry, you did a pin-up.
Yeah, ours was a pin-up. So we had 4 AO boards.
Yep.
I'm happy to show those as well if you want, but I don't know. I just don't think it has much much meaning to the way that you guys are presenting now. Yeah, it was. I think for a process log, like somewhere between 50 to like 100 pages is probably a good number. But you know, it just depends on what you have, and you know, if you're able to succinct heaps of information onto one page, do that, because then it's just pages for no reason. Yeah,
great. All super advice. Steph, I'm aware of time. So should we jump to Scott? Steph, thank you. That was terrific to see. Nice, super nice use of salmon. Just saying.
I really like the salmon.
All right, I'll just pull up my screen. Yeah, so my project, I haven't been able to locate my process log, and I think from memory it was actually like a hard copy sketchbook type.
Steph and Scott, just remind us what year did you do yours?
I did mine 2018. Yes.
And Scott, what year's yours?
2017.
Okay, good. Just got a little context going. Thank you.
Cool. Can you see my screen? It's just like a series of images.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. I just wanted to show everyone where the site was that our studio was focused on, which is Camellia, which is you know, about 20 k's west of the Sydney CBD. There's our site just kind of circled there, close to Parramatta, at the kind of fork of the Parramatta River and the Duck River, which is pretty interesting. It's a former oil refinery. It's like a, you know, kind of really degraded, highly contaminated and polluted you know, wasteland almost. So there's lots of relevance and similarities to our site at White Bays. And similar, it was very hard to access, you know, most of the site. It's kind of being decommissioned, the oil refining process, but all the existing and redundant infrastructure was still visible, and it was like incredibly rich and just, you know, a super, you know, interesting and crazy part of Sydney. So yeah, like most of it was fenced off, really hard to get access to. But what was really, you know, striking is just the scale and pretty much just the scale of, you know, the manufacturing process and the kind of extraction landscape, which I was really fascinated with, and how you know, the existing landform has been, you know, altered so much from a kind of really flat and gentle, you know, kind of area to a kind of, you know, just, you know, steep in areas, and really just serving the manufacturing purpose. So it was a pretty crazy site, hard to access, and therefore, like, some of the strategies I used just to kind of get bits of the site into my imagery, I'll speak about in a second. But what was really important, like what was really dominant, was like the material and the patina on these, you know, old storage tanks, you know, pockets of existing vegetation. This, for instance, a spotted gum, really striking trunk. And we were also kind of, we were challenged to access the site. So my friend and I was on a paddleboard and he was on a kayak, and we kind of just put in on the Parramatta River and paddled up the Duck River. Pretty crazy, even just to see the contamination like on the surface of the Duck River, but then just the bird life in the mangroves that kind of fringed our site. And then just lots of these, wacky signs saying, oil pipeline below ground, high pressure oil pipeline, lots of warnings and danger signs. And then also, signage about how the stormwater and seepage water in the area is contaminated. So, it's not shying away from the fact that it's, highly polluted and highly degraded. And, in some parts it's like a prison almost. So it was a fascinating site. And, I'm not sure if you guys can jump on a paddleboard or not, but there's more than one way to get around the site. So that was just.
I have seen paddleboarders there actually. So if anyone's got a paddleboard, about it.
Yeah, and it was really useful and super insightful. So that was, I'd recommend that if you can. And so anyway, this is just a screenshot of my final boards. I'm not sure if you can see. Does that come up on the screen now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically we had to present 5 A0 boards, or the equivalent of. So I had 3 A0s, half a width A0, and then 4 A2s with some, just some bigger imagery and some more detailed plans. And then I had 3 models, which were, like sectional kind of, segments of my site. And one was a little 3D printed kind of detailed model, which I was able to hand around to the jurors, which is obviously not the case. But so that's just how, just for a bit of context to how that was presented.
Yeah, nice to see, Scott.
And now this was my first board, but I think what I'll speak to is probably just the narrative here. My project was called, I named it Accrued Change, and I really was fascinated with the kind of the manufacturing and extraction landscape, and how I was kind of positioning this this oil refinery within Australia's changing oil landscape. And so there's lots of these sites around these kind of networks of sites around Australia, which are now being decommissioned due to capacity and price advantage of some kind of mega infrastructures in Southeast Asia. So my project was really, I was really fascinated with the existing infrastructural landscape and trying to see how you can adapt the kind of bones of the infrastructural landscape into a new park or a new city park, and one that kind of utilizes waste, infrastructure, and displacement, which are kind of often themes associated with these really heavily industrialized and degraded kind of infrastructural landscape. So I kind of just fairly abstractly mapped out some the broader themes of the oil and the kind of extraction landscape around what it serves, petroleum and like the products, and then but also some of the impacts of this wider system around impacting on ecologies, and also settlements, and reducing land value and the kind of toxic legacy that's left behind in these sites. We had a kind of broader theoretical framework, but I just kind of focused in on three of that were most important and most impactful to my project. Julie Bargman, which I've told a Dirt Studio, she's a really great landscape architect. Kate Orff from Scape Studio, and Giles Clement, a French landscape architect. So I guess slightly different, but I had a kind of hero image at the on this kind of first slide, and I just kind of pieced in those big old former oil storage tanks, which were really obvious and dominant in the landscape, but they formed.
I have to say I quite like that hero image start, like that kind of bang you're in. I quite like it.
Yeah,
and then you speak back to it.
And so that I suppose I'll talk on the use of color. Like this was the only full page of color as on the boards. The smaller renders were obviously full color, but this kind of had the most impact and the most kind of meaning up front. So then the next page was a little bit about analysis, and I suppose because I kind of took a slightly kind of like diagnostic route and lots of analysis. Again, I was sorry. Yeah, I was interested in kind of positioning this, out the site at Camellia with the kind of, the toxic, Sydney's toxic legacy, and, the kind of manufacturing history along the Sydney Harbour and some of those, wider sites, and the next networks between. And then I just had a bit of information about the relationship to the master plan, to like our term one work, which was a broader kind of structure plan and kind of urban design proposition for the whole of Camellia. So I just had some briefly touched on this project's relationship to that, and how I was aligning with it in some ways, but departing from it in others. And then also just some relation to the current site, because because it was hard to access, and you can't, this was all fenced off. So I was really interested in retaining infrastructure where possible, but then just gave some justification for where I was departing or changing the existing landscape. In terms of the diagnostics or the analysis, again, just showing just imagery of the site, imagery of the waste and the kind of contaminants and their volumes that were around the site. Also some potential acid sulfate soils, which are difficult to manage. And then I was looking at the capacity of the adjacent landscape in terms of dealing with stormwater and how that would work. Again, fairly diagrammatic and fairly abstract, but this would all was all forming my response. And I was just interested in the kind of existing industrial grid, which was really evident on our side in particular. But when I think to the side at White Bay, there's the that existing apron is incredibly rich, and the existing rail lines and stuff that run through there, all give hints to its former use. And so my design was really responding to the kind of grid that was set up by this kind of infrastructural landscape. The site had these crazy high pressure oil pipelines and gas pipelines coming in and out and going to the broader Sydney area. And then it also there's also some potential green and golden bell frogs. There also was green and golden bell frogs found in this particular location of the site. They kind of disturbed areas and disused areas to kind of create habitat, and so my design is kind of sympathetic to that. In terms of diagramming, what was really interesting, what was really clear was that it had this this infrastructural vernacular. It had depressions to account for all those pipes. It had depressions where the tanks were sitting to absorb any potential oil spill. And so what I was interested in is seeing how if the adjacent land was to be developed, there would be obviously waste generated from that process. And so how in some in some areas we could potentially absorb that waste and cap it and create a kind of a level plane. And then some areas we can we could potentially absorb it and create landforms and some kind of interesting elements in the landscape. So it was how could my site work as hard as possible to kind of remediate and absorb some of the toxic legacy that's around it. And then again, this is all pretty computer graphic-y, so I'm not sure how well it's popping up on the screen, but we had a master plan, which which had some relationship to the group structure plan, but also some relationship to the site, and some small interventions which highlighted the existing storage tanks, highlighted the existing kind of pipe network, and bridged over it in parts and filled in others. And
your work in that master plan with all those pullouts, that's great.
Yeah, and so what I was trying to do was basically for each, I didn't have a set distance, but say 50 or 100 meters, I'd pull out a section, and then in Illustrator, I just basically extended a little bit beyond that section line to give some kind of depth to it. And again, what I was trying to show was this red was also consistent, just showing, that's basically where the toxic waste was, being absorbed in this site. So that was consistent throughout the sections, which was what I was trying to show. And then, in some areas where where the tanks were being retained because there was potential frog habitat, that obviously I haven't shown, you know, what's happening below that kind of, you know, concrete, you know, the concrete like topping to the site. But that's, you know, where it was just left in place, and you know, vegetation was to colonize. So yeah, so I suppose that as a way to have the plan, it's, you know, it is pretty static, you know, just a plan view. But I was, yeah, thinking about how to make that more dynamic, especially when it's, you know, on a really big A0 page. So these little, you know, graphics I spent a fair bit of time on, but they were pretty rich, and they were, you know, of a nice scale that you could you know, see all the detail. And I think in a digital presentation, like if you were to, you know, create a series of sections along your site, you know, this could almost be given one page each, and you can just kind of layer them up as they kind of move down, and you could have a little key plan or something at the bottom of each page to show where that is taken, just for a bit of context.
The textures are great, Scott.
Yeah, that was just
and it's kind of like technical, like CAD almost.
Yeah, this was all done in Illustrator. So there's, yeah, you know, like lots of different textures and stuff, and hatches and fills and stuff you can create in Illustrator. I think it's really flexible. So that's how I found, you know, most use out of that. And then my next page was about like kind of waste and water, and this was again a little bit technical, just showing how, yeah, you know, some of the areas on my site could be, you know, phytoremediation farms, or they could be, you know, just simply phytoremediation forests treated, you know, in situ. And then, you know, where waste was kind of brought in, they could be, you know, mounded and create a kind of nice and dynamic landscape. And then also in parts, they could be, you know, just the waste could just be capped and absorbed, and then, you know, create this kind of level kind of landscaped area for various programs. And then I was also like kind of looking at the stormwater capacity. Again, this is, you know, it seems technical, but it's not really. It's just, I was just kind of showing, I did some like small calculations about, you know, the potential storage capacity of those existing silos that were on site. And then, you know, in rain events, I'm not sure how it would work, but potentially water could be pumped to them, or stormwater could be pumped to them, stored, and then gradually let out into these, you know, broader kind of pond networks and treated. So I just had a slightly more technical page, but I tried to kind of keep like the approach fairly diagrammatic. And
God, sorry,
yeah.
I hate to interrupt. Steph, did you need to go at 4:30?
No, it's fine. No, I can hang up. Yep.
For sure.
Yep.
Sure.
Cool.
Because you could always, you know, you could always go bye, and, you know, we're recording you. Sorry, go.
Yeah. So yeah, and then I kind of had like a quantification about how much, you know, potentially how much, you know, volume this site could you know, could take, and then I had like, you know, a comparison to Olympic swimming pools, just to kind of give it some tangibility. And same with the waste. Like I was kind of, my argument was that, look, you know, this could save, you know, 5,200 dump truck loads if this intervention and this site was to go ahead.
Scott. I think really, yeah, it's a really good technique that make a tangible kind of comparative. You know, as long as 4 buses or this many swimming pools or whatever, that can be really great.
Yeah. And then these are just some kind of zoom ins, like those kind of 4, you know, images that were sitting next to my boards. But this was something that I wanted to kind of, show more qualities of the site in this detailed drawing. So this is like a plan of a particular area. I kind of highlighted a little bit of the silo, some of the kind of like, you know, textural variants of the kind of like frog ponds. And also, you know, highlighting those channels where all the pipelines were running. And my design was kind of responding to that, but less kind of like technical and high level as the master plan. I wanted something that was a little bit more tangible and showed a little bit more of the materiality of the site. And then this is a section just basically across the middle of that plan, and showing some of that, like this is, you know, some of the kind of like phytoremediation application on this site, and I, you know, tried to show some of the soil and the roots in that particular drawing. It's difficult to see on this computer. And then just some more imagery about you know, walking through, like this was from like the top of my site, because it was very linear. So this was at the top, this was kind of in the middle, and then this was at the base of the site, and they kind of just stepped through step through the, my kind of interventions and what I was, I've spoken to my group a little bit about this, but what I was trying to show, this is fairly abstract, but just some of the textures of, native trees. This was, the Crimbia maculata, which was on site from that photograph. And then, some kind of bark of Sydney red gum and Gopher costata. And that was like a feature that I was trying to portray in my representation. And then, that's really all I had. And then these are just a few. What I was interested in is because this model was kind of CNC milled out of ABS plastic, and like plastic is like a byproduct of crude oil and the kind of oil processing. So I had two of these kind of like segmented models, which were from ABS plastic, and kind of were just part of the broader narrative of my approach and intervention. So that's just a.
That's so neat that you used the plastic. How cool! That's something students could definitely do. If they
cohesive thing, cohesion of an idea.
Mm.
I mean, my brother actually works at a model making fabrication place, so I had access to lots of cool materials and things like that, which is which was lucky. But I think it was nice to kind of tie that into the broader narrative.
Thank you both. Beautiful. Thank you both. They're both beautiful projects. Just great to see, actually, and the cohesion of them and the smarts of them, actually. And there's the tie-ins to our existing site. I'm just aware of time. I'm going to share my screen. I've only got about 6 images to show. Not uninteresting. I think all of us in our final projects have done contaminated sites, sort of industrial sites and contaminated sites. It's kind of interesting, really. Okay, sorry. Got nice, super nice to see your models. Winding it back. So this is 1997 and down in Melbourne, but we, I did a group project with a very good friend, actually, who we then went on to work professionally with on a couple of projects, which was a sort of a useful step, actually. And it might be something you all do further down the track if you find you've got a good working relationship with somebody in your undergraduate years that could flourish into something more professional. But we were looking at this site. I'm sorry, when I bumped into PowerPoint just about half an hour ago, just before this, it's cropped off the top, but our site was actually up here. So it's called, crikey, gosh, it's a long time ago. It's called West, it's, God, I can't remember what it's called. I'm so sorry, everyone. It's it's a different city. My head is not in it, I have to say, but it's the mouth of the Yarra River and to Port Phillip. So Melbourne City is up here, actually. Web Dock is what it's called, and it was all this section in here. So a working harbour, very much so. And I guess this size specificity. Also, we had a great big bridge, Westgate Bridge, like Anzac Bridge, just adjacent to us. But all the time trying to keep. I've really hard to got. I've only got 3 images to show you of this. It's in most of it's hard copy in an attic somewhere, and I haven't spent time running through old databases to get to it. But just the grit of the site, I suppose, we tried to keep a lot of the mood of the working dock that it was going to retain as a working dock, and we were trying to get it to become a cleaning kind of wetland in a pattern making that was of the nature.
You may have gone on mute, Patrick. Or he may have dropped out.
Yeah, I think he might have dropped out.
I don't know how to fix this because he's recording on his end. Technical issues. Sorry, students. He is it. I think Patrick's in his car, so maybe something happened with connection.
Yeah, just sent a message.
Lovely drawing. I'm assuming it's a drawing. Yes?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of cool.
Yeah.
It'd be awesome to see the whole project.
Yeah.
Oh. Hopefully he'll come back. It was really great. I remember, Scott, them showing us your project as sample work when I was a student.
Cool.
And because you had really nice sequencing on your boards, particularly using not the regular, just all conventional AOs, but breaking it up to different sizes was really neat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I haven't, like, in practice, I've never presented on A0 boards, like, apart from community consultation work and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that's obviously fairly prescribed, you know, like a prescribed layout. So I think working in digitally and presenting like a digital presentation is so, you know, in keeping with what you do in practice.
Yeah, I think students definitely have the upper hand.
Yeah, definitely.
Gosh, I don't know what to do.
Yeah. Maybe we should just jump out and try and get onto Patrick again.
Hopefully he doesn't lose the recording. I'm going to hit stop recording, or should I not?
I'm not sure.
Let's just leave and come back.
Yeah, I'm not sure if we were because I think this was just a call between our tutor chat.
And then he will keep the recording, I suppose.
I think so. I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
We'll come back. Okay.
All right. See ya.